Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Voice of the Customer. Today's event is the first in a series of webinars that we will be doing this spring called Turning Your Data into Dollars. And in these webinars, we'll be discussing various methods of measuring how your digital assets are performing and how you might act on that data. My name is Brian Becker. I'm joined by Marcus Blankenship.
Hello.
We're both from Creo, which is a digital agency based in Oregon. And despite our somewhat strange looking headshots, Marcus and I actually do have a fair amount of experience working with clients on digital measurement setup and analysis and optimization and reporting. And today we're going to talk a bit about voice of the customer tools and best practices. As I had mentioned, Creo is based out in Oregon. For those of you who may never have been to Oregon or the West Coast, I'd encourage you to come. We've got a number of beautiful things here. This is Crater Lake, which is located in the southern part of the state. Really a remarkable thing to look at. Up in the northern part of the state, there's of course the city of Portland, and there's Mount Hood off in the distance in that slide. And out to the west, there's the Oregon coast, which is frequently very blustery and cold, but beautiful nonetheless. Having done my bit for Oregon tourism, we've got a couple of housekeeping items we want to attend to now.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us, folks. The event today is going to be recorded, and you'll receive a follow-up email later this week with a link to the recording. We're also going to be fielding questions at the end of the presentation, a bit like Stump the Analyst. So please put your questions in the questions pane of GoToWebinar, and we will address those in the last 15 to 20 minutes. Any question is allowed, no question too hard. Today's webinar should be in total between 45 and 60 minutes.
All right, so we'll give you a lay of the land of how we're going to spend the next 45, or if we're fairly long-winded, 60 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say voice of the customer. We're going to talk again about tools and some of the options that you've got available to you for gathering voice of the customer feedback. We should note at this point that the tools that we're going to be focusing on for purposes of this webinar are low to mid-cost options. We're not going to be focusing on the large customer experience management platforms that are out there now and that many large tech companies are putting together. That is a webinar or a series of webinars for another time. We'll discuss a few best practices. We'll conclude with a few fabulous pearls of wisdom. And as Marcus said at the end, we'll do a couple of questions and answers. So let's begin.
Yeah.
Voice of the customer, or VOC. What do we mean when we use that term? Well, as you might imagine, we're talking about visitor feedback, customer feedback, gathering this information on how people are experiencing your digital assets. And by assets here, I'm talking about your web apps, your websites, mobile apps, responsive sites, etc. Any digital tools that you're building in an effort to communicate with a larger audience in the digital world. Now, voice of the customer feedback's different from quantitative data. Quantitative data is the sort of thing that you get from Google Analytics or Site Catalyst or any other clickstream analysis tools that we use to measure traffic. Those tools tell you what and they tell you when. So for example, during a certain period of time, what was my traffic level? What were my referrals? What was my conversion rate, et cetera, et cetera. Voice of the customer feedback, on the other hand, really is qualitative, and it focuses on the why, and in some cases the who. So why might one or a series of people have a certain experience using your mobile app or your website? And in some cases, those people, when giving you that feedback, will tell you who they are as a way to provide context to that feedback. And in other cases, they'll tell you who they are and they'll provide contact information because there's an expectation that you're going to take their feedback and act upon it in some way and then get back to them. And that's an opportunity that we'll talk about later. When you take the quantitative data that you have from your analytics tools and you combine it with the qualitative data that you've got from voice of the customer, you will find that you get actionable insights that you can use to improve your web asset.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For example, if you are driving paid traffic to landing pages and people aren't converting, that is a prime place to put a page level survey to ask people what their purpose of visit was today. What are they trying to accomplish? Because there's nothing more frustrating than buying traffic, moving people with a promise from an ad onto a landing page, and then just watching them bounce and leave. I've been through that many times. It is extraordinarily expensive and frustrating. So voice of the customers tools allow you to ask people directly, what were you hoping to do, along with a slew of other questions, to hear exactly what their expectation was so that you can craft an offer and an expectation that they're ready to accept.
So you might ask yourself, well, why do this? Isn't it enough for me to just put up a contact us page? And if people want to talk to me, they can. And the short answer to that question is no, it's not enough. There are very real benefits to implementing an active voice of the customer feedback program. The first of which is voice of the customer is smart public relations. People have an expectation to be heard. And if their experience on your digital asset isn't what they had hoped for, they want to talk about it. And you want them to talk to you about that. You want to provide them with a forum to give you that feedback. If you don't provide them that forum, you may be reading about their experience on their blog or on Facebook or some other social media platform. And that's exactly the sort of experience that you don't want to have. You need to be proactive so that you're inviting that feedback to them. Another reason why you may want to do voice of the customer is that it improves your bottom line. You can make money doing this sort of work or save money doing this sort of work. Uh, by actively engaging your customers and your visitors, you improve your satisfaction levels. You increase loyalty. Those people come back to you to make their purchases or come back to you to consume content, whatever it is that you're offering. Sometimes, in the case of on-time retailers, if you act quickly enough, you can make amends or remedy the situation in a time frame that can make a difference, or in other words, that can save a sale. If an individual is coming onto your site looking to purchase a particular product and they're not able to do so, they contact you with that complaint and you get back to them quickly enough, you can still build goodwill by responding to them and then actually still save that sale that you would otherwise have lost. Keep in mind too that customer feedback allows you to update your products, to learn how your products are working, and whether we're talking about digital products here or actually tangible products. How are your products working? How are they working in the marketplace? Customer feedback in this context is great market research. You can also reduce the amount of inbound calls to your customer service group. These folks get calls every day about every number of things. If your forms and your surveys are able to reduce the volume of those calls, that's a savings to your organization. So let's talk about a few of the tools that you've got available to you. And the first one we're going to talk about is the site level survey form. And as people who have been on the web, my guess is most of us have seen that. You go to a website and you're prompted to answer a few questions about the site as a whole, not just a page, but rather the site as a whole. And the purpose here is to measure overall customer satisfaction. So again, to come back to the site level survey form. Now, the surveys will typically begin, or after an individual has said that they want to complete the survey, such that they're not asked to complete the survey during the middle of the process, which would impede their overall browsing experience. Another issue or another element or characteristic of the site level survey form is that it allows you to do custom targeting. And what I mean by that is that you can target people who are coming from specific URLs. You can target people who are returning visitors, perhaps, people who have spent a certain amount of time on the site, people who have completed an interaction on a specific page that you have. A lot of these tools give you a fair amount of flexibility in terms of when you want to pop this survey and to whom. Another nice thing about some of these site level survey tools is that on the back end, you get industry benchmarking. And by this, I mean, the tools will tell you not only how you're doing in terms of customer satisfaction, but also how others in your sector are doing in terms of customer satisfaction. And you can compare that with other sectors. So for example, if you're in the financial services industry, how well are you doing in comparison to others in the financial service industry? And then how well does the financial service industry do compared to, say, media sites or online retailers or other sectors? Here's a few examples of the site level survey form. This is LL Bean, which is a well-known online retailer. They're using a tool here called 4C. And as we mentioned before, this is the prompt that you would receive in going to their site. And if you agree that you're going to give feedback, in this case, this prompt would go away. And as you can see in the language on the prompt, your survey would come up at the end of your visit rather than the beginning of the visit. And if you hit no, of course, then the survey goes away altogether. Here's an example of what the survey actually looks like, or at least one example of what a survey could look like. This is Pella, which is a large manufacturer of doors and windows. Again, they're using the 4C tool. And if an individual had said yes to complete the customer satisfaction survey, they would get a survey that looks something like this, or could get a survey that looks something like this. You'll see that there are 10 questions here listed. There are actually more below this. I didn't get them all in the screenshot. And the questions here range from 1 to 10 in terms of satisfaction level. And as you can see, the questions are fairly straightforward in terms of what they're asking. How was your experience? What was the balance of graphics to test? Did you see all that you needed to see on the product detail page, for example? Questions of this nature are particularly quantifiable. That is, because we're talking numbers here, on the back end, you can easily get an average, your overall customer satisfaction average, because the numbers here or the questions rather, are numbers oriented. A second type of tool that's available to you is a page level survey form as compared to a site level survey form. In this case, the visitor or the customer is being asked about a specific page. And feedback here typically appears on, or will appear on, all of the pages so that you can get data about every single page on your site. The user is the one who initiates the survey here, as opposed to the site level survey form where the system initiates that depending on how you configure when you're going to pop the survey. In this case, the user clicks the link to provide survey to you, the publisher. The backend analytics on this are particularly useful. They will provide information on every single page that you've got. And as a result, you can identify problems on every single page, or if you've got problems on a specific page. If you have landing pages. Hi, Marcus, you're back?
I'm back. Sorry, keep going.
All right. We're on page level survey forms right now. And I'm making the last point here is the benefit of a page level survey form is you can put this survey on a landing page or a beginning of the funnel page. Those are particularly significant pages. You're likely spending money, time, and attention getting traffic to those pages. You need to be assured that those pages are giving people what it is that they expect when they arrive there. Having a survey level or a page level survey form on that page allows you to do that.
That's right. That's a great place to identify where the mismatch is possibly between your PPC ads or your other traffic drivers and what you're offering in an advertisement possibly, and what a person then is seeing on the page, because there's nothing more frustrating than paying for traffic and then simply watching it bounce away.
Right. So here's a few examples of a page level survey form. Here's VMware, which is a cloud computing company. You'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a link for site feedback. Should a user click that link, they then would get this sort of what they call comment card or survey. The tool that they're using here is called Opinion Lab. And notice some of the questions or how they approach their voice of the customer feedback process. Notice the first one, in which they're looking for general information, an open-ended question about page comments. They're asking, let us know what you think of this web page and any of the improvements that you think we should make. Note too, that they're asking for name and email address. It's optional, but they're still making the request. And as we said at the outset of this presentation, Who is a big part of voice of the customer feedback. People are frequently very happy to provide that information to you, both to provide context for their feedback as well as the next item here, getting contacted by you to determine whether or not you receive their feedback and what, if anything, you're able to do about it.
That's right. You know what I love about that one, Brian, is I love it. It's so much simpler than the Pella survey with the 10 or 12 or this long page of questions. It really looks like something that I, as a site user, could quickly fill out. And I think as a marketer, the idea that someone's just going to have a free-form text box to write in what they think, on one hand, not easily quantifiable. It's very difficult to chart those things. But that's where real nuggets of gold come in. That's where you can really start to change your organization by creating empathy for the people who take time to fill these out, because in their own words, in their own voice, they're telling you what's working for them and what's not. And then, of course, we're going to find out uses for this contact information in the future, here in just a few minutes, even beyond customer service activities.
So we'll move on to another example of a page-based survey. This is REI, another popular online retailer. You'll notice at the bottom they make a call to action. They're asking how we're doing. Please give us feedback on this page. And if one were to click that particular link, you would see this window come up. Notice that, like VMware, they have an open-ended question on the right-hand side. They're asking you to give us your comments. Tell us what you think in your own words. But then they complement that with more structured approach on the right-hand side, a more structured approach as compared to the more freewheeling approach on the right-hand side. Here, they've got a numerical approach to content, to design, to ease of use, and overall usability.
And this, Brian, has my very favorite voice of the customer question. What is the purpose of your visit today? We're going to see here soon that companies like 4Q Suite and iParticipation have really built their entire product line around this question and a couple of other simple ones. But imagine if you could, being able to look at your data, look at your clickstream analytics, look at your Google Analytics, look at your all kinds of information simply by segmenting by the purpose of visits. Knowing why people came, it will change the way you think about your website. That's my very favorite voice of the customer question.
So here's one more example. This is American Express that also uses Opinion Lab on a page-based level. I put this in this deck just to underscore the fact that your calls to action don't necessarily have to be real discrete, as you saw in VMware and with REI. American Express uses a feedback tab that floats on your scroll so that it goes with you wherever you happen to go, and it, as a result, is much more prominent. And if you clicked on there, as you'd see that American Express follows a very structured approach in terms of what information that they're asking for from their visitors, and does not give you the option of providing feedback in your own words, at least on this particular page. So the two tools that we've showed you here are 4C, which again is the site level survey tool, and Opinion Lab, which is the page level survey tool. And we thought we'd just include some numbers here in terms of what it would cost should you contract with these companies. 4C, as you can see, is going to cost you $60,000 or more per year. Opinion Lab, slightly more. If your organization does a great deal of business online, if you have a wide suite of digital assets and you're invested heavily into digital, having used both of these tools, I'd recommend using one or both or something like them. They provide you a wealth of information. They are somewhat expensive, but at the same time, I would give them a thumbs up, because I can't tell you the number of times that we found things out based on what Opinion Lab told us as it related to a particular page, or what 4C was telling us in terms of overall site satisfaction. Marcus, would you give them a thumbs up too, or would you take a different tact on these?
I like these tools, but I think that the tools we're going to show, the lower cost tools, probably provide 75% of the value, frankly. I mean, I think if you're doing business online and you're getting $1 million in sales a year, these kinds of tools are vital. This level of tooling
because your reporting is so much richer. But I think the free tools offer a tremendous amount of insights as well.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of these lower cost options that you've got available to you. So here's a few of them. This list by no means is exhaustive. WebEngage is a tool that's out there. Pop Feedback. Qualaroo is a fairly popular tool. That's formerly KISS Insights, which some of you may know. ForceQ Suite, which was one of the pioneers in this area, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later. And User Voice. And as I said, this is not an exhaustive list, but all of these tools are out there, and you can either use a no-cost option. Several of them do provide a no-cost option, or a what we'd call low-cost option, which is several $100s or perhaps less on a monthly basis, depending on what particular components of the tool that you choose to subscribe to.
And so I think some of these tools have subscription plans that are sub $25 to $50 to just get your feet wet.
You know, that's a good point. We'll probably come back to it later. But in terms of why you should be doing VOC, a lot of this is extremely easy to do from an implementation standpoint. And as it relates to these lower cost tools, they don't cost very much. So you're running out of reasons why you should not be doing this. The upside to doing this is high. The cost for entry into this area is very low.
Yeah, I mean, there is no IT support needed. You don't have to call up your web programmer and tell him your questions. These kinds of tools all provide huge banks of pre-written questions, tips and tactics and white papers on best practices around using the data. And all your IT department may have to do, if anything, is drop a JavaScript snippet into the bottom of the page. And you, from the tool, will actually control the targeting, where the surveys are viewed, what questions are asked, and the tool collects all that information. There's no programming needed. It really is just criminal not to be doing it in this day and age.
So I thought we'd show you a couple of examples of these tools and actions. This is a screenshot of the Creo agency's website homepage. In the lower right-hand corner here is Qualaroo. This is a sample of their nudge, which is a small JavaScript window that resides in the lower right-hand corner, and they allow you to put one or two straightforward questions in it. It can exist on all pages or on whatever pages, collection of pages that you choose to put it on, but it's a somewhat discreet way for you to gather voice of the customer feedback, but at the same time, do it in a way that your users are aware when they look to the lower right-hand corner of the page that the feedback option is available. Here's another example. Again, this is a screenshot of the Creo homepage. This one comes to us from 4Q or iPerceptions, and here they've got a site level survey form that we'll just walk through. This is somewhat similar to what 4C does, but as Marcus pointed out, their cost here will not be as high as what you would expect to pay should you contract with 4C. So if you chose yes here, this is the call out for the survey. If you decide to participate, you then get another pop-up which invites you to start the questionnaire. And once you do start the questionnaire, you go through a series of very straightforward questions, and we'll just walk through them here. So the first question here, go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
So the first question here is, based on today's visit, how would you rate your overall site experience on a scale from 0 being very bad to 10 being outstanding? Second, which of the following best describes the primary purpose of your visit? And here you would configure what are likely purposes of visit, but you may also have an open-ended component here to find out if people are coming to your site for reasons that you didn't anticipate. Third, were you able to complete your primary purpose of your visit? It's a straightforward question, but one oftentimes that isn't asked. And if an individual in this case says yes, then you get another open-ended question about what do you like most about the digital asset that you happen to be on. And if the user's answer was no, then please tell us why it was no. Why were you not able to fully complete the purpose of your site today, or the purpose of your visit today?
Right.
Marcus, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, if a person had answered yes in this particular case, they would have been asked, what do you like about our website, or what feedback would you have? So as you think about your web properties, as you think about your life online and the fact that you are trying to do business through your website, how important would it be for you to know those 3 to 4 very simple things. What's our score, 1 to 10? Why were you here today? Were you able to complete the reason? Were you able to do what you hoped when you came? And if so, what worked well? And if not, what didn't work? And 4Q, actually, this survey, as you see it here today, is completely free. This is 4Q's free plan. It has limited integration with Google Analytics in that you can actually push the kinds of data into Google Analytics, and then I believe it's for a very low price, under $25 a month. Google Analytics will actually push data back into 4Q, and we'll talk about how that can really lead to deep insights when you're starting to segment and look at your responses.
All right, so we've gone over a few samples of mid-tier tools and now some lower level or lower cost tools. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about best practices when implementing a voice of the customer program. So first thing is have a plan. As we've said, it's very simple to do this. The barrier to entry is fairly low, but that doesn't mean you should just jump into it without thinking it through. Think to yourself, what is it that you want to learn? What are the assumptions that you want to confirm or challenge about your particular digital asset? And what are the specific questions do you want to ask and have answered? And think too about how you want to go about that. You saw examples here of very open-ended questions, and then you saw examples of very structured questions. What serves your particular needs the most? Think too about the methods for gathering the feedback. Now, we've walked through some of the surveys, site level and page level, that are available to you, but there's other ways for you to gather feedback. It's not all about implementing tools on your website or mobile app. I mean, one option that you could take is the sort of old school option of in-person focus groups, where you invite a series of people into a conference room and there's a mirrored window and it's recorded and there's a facilitator. And this sort of approach gives you an opportunity to really drill down into what people think about, in this case, your digital asset. I've been involved in a number of in-person focus groups, and they are very, very effective. But they also can be somewhat time-consuming. So you'll have to sort of decide what's best for you. Another approach that you can take, and we'll call these focus groups as well, but rather than doing them in person, you can do them online, whereby using a tool very much like this one that we're using for this webinar, Citrix or WebEx or On24, conduct an online survey, or rather an online interview with a number of your visitors or customers. And again, you can share screens, you can walk through a series of pages, you can get their impact and their feedback on how they experience these pages. I would encourage you to certainly record the event so that you've got the recording after the fact. I've sat through a number of these online interviews, and I think I've got the notes, but every time I re-listen to a recording, I will oftentimes find that I missed something and I learned something new when I listen to the recording. Certainly you need to record audio. If it's possible, record video as well, because it's great to see people's facial expressions and their mannerisms as they're explaining what their experience is to you. So just keep in mind that there's other ways to gather this data, and it's not all about tools on a survey. Another important point, let me just finish this point here about in-house resources. So if you're in a large organization, oftentimes there will be other segments of the company that may have direct contact with customers or visitors. So I'm thinking here about customer service, for example, your sales staff, perhaps distributors. All of these people are dealing with your visitors, your customers, people who are using your digital assets. They're a resource for you as someone who's responsible for building and or improving these digital assets. Use them. Oftentimes, I think both Marcus and I have had experience at former employers where there was a wall of some sort between the development group and those people, such as customer service, who were actively working with our visitors and our customers, and there wasn't much communication between the two. That's a problem. Additionally, think of these people as not only a way to convey information from your visitors and your customers, but also they themselves are a resource, because they're oftentimes actively using your tool. Think about customer service again. In answering questions that they get over the phone, they're oftentimes sitting on your website, navigating through the website, using the various web apps, and they have opinions themselves on what's working and what's not working. So there's a deep well of feedback that you can get from in-house resources. And just remember to tap it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of those things, and there's a lot of wisdom in what you said. And I think, Brian, our depth on the bench really kind of has shown us that the gold that exists in the other in-house resources. I would appeal to folks, don't make it overcomplicated. Really, you do need to be committed to listening, and I think you do need to be committed to being willing to really hear the bad news and wanting to change. That commitment, I think, trumps everything else. Having a great plan, but not caring if really how people are experiencing your website and if they can do what they need to do. Don't go down this road. Just don't. Get off the webinar now. Hang up. If you're not interested in what your folks have to say, this is not the right tool, because it does take your time and it takes their time, and it absolutely gives people the impression that you care. And so I think you really do have to commit to acting on those conclusions. But don't make it harder than it needs to be. Start with a low-end tool. Get a little, start with something free or $10 a month and see what you can collect. I think you'll find it to be addicting to get that real feedback from users, and it will change your perceptions and your perspective on who your users are.
All right, so best practice number 2, not surprisingly, is keep it simple. And this is in relationship particularly to the surveys that you're using. You will get higher response rates. You will get more thoughtful responses when you're asking fewer questions. And I think you saw that in a number of the tools where the questions, or the space for questions, they're simple questions and there's not many of them. If you burden your users with a great deal of questions, oftentimes they'll simply just close down the survey, or the responses that you get will be very quick and they simply are just trying to get through the survey. So make a point to be respectful of their time, ask fewer, and you will actually get more in response.
Yeah, also simple questions really do lead to advanced insights. You don't need, in my opinion at least, 15 questions or 3 pages of questions to find out how people like your website. Chances are you need something along the lines of 4 to 5 questions with an option to collect some data if they'd like to be contacted. And then really segment that data. Look at the purpose of visit and the satisfaction scores segmented together. We found when working with an educational institution that overall their satisfaction score was high, but once we started segmenting it by the purpose of visit, we found opportunities, we found low-hanging fruit where we could dramatically improve where those people, the experience for those people that were coming for a purpose of visit that we had really thought was a very ancillary one, and yet a lot of traffic was bringing those folks to our site. Right. So it changed our understanding of our audience mix.
So number 3 best practice, analyze and report. You've got the data, make it point to sit down and go through it. Look for trends, look for pain points around usability, around functionality, around content, around design. Compare your performance to yourself, that is how you're doing this month versus last month, this quarter versus last quarter, this year versus last year, and then recognize why you might be doing better or worse based on the development steps that you've taken. Also compare your performance with others in your own industry. Again, I'm going back to the industry benchmarks that you get with 4C and with Opinion Lab. I find that particularly useful. It's really great to know that you're at the top of your group, of your particular industrial sector, or if you're not at the top, that tells you that you've
got, at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly, that you've got work to do yet, and that you're not, hitting on cylinders, so to speak. Marcus had talked about integration, but the high-end tools, both 4C and Opinion Lab, do integrate with clickstream analysis tools such as GA and Site Catalyst, but also some of the low-cost ones do as well. And when you manage to integrate, you are able to push data back and forth. So for example, you can take, say, your 4C data, and you may want to segment your 4C data. All the people who really enjoyed your website, let's take a look at those individuals in Google Analytics, and let's see, did they convert the way that we wanted them to convert? What are the pages that they landed on? Did they bounce on things? Or conversely, how about those people in 4C that didn't respond positively to the feedback survey, where did they go on your website? What was their experience in terms of where they went and what pages they visited, and what was their conversion rate? That information, again, is particularly useful when you pull them together. Also,
right, and then the inverse is true as well, Brian. Looking at your analytics data and say, what were the comments from people who came from paid traffic? What was their experience rating? What was their perception of purpose of visit? Of course, you bought them. You want them to come for a reason. So hearing why they thought they were coming versus, and you bought an ad, that's very telling. And so you can mix in the data both ways to find those rich insights.
All right, that's a good point. We've talked about this already, but it's worth repeating. Analyze your responses by segment. Don't treat all the people the same, because frankly, people aren't the same. You are able to group them based on certain characteristics, and you will frequently find examples of where you may have thought that you were doing one way, but once you actually drill down into the various segments, you find that things actually differ based on the groups that you're looking at. And finally, don't.
And the last one.
Go ahead.
Right, go ahead. Oh, the last one is just in a lot of our analytics reports, we actually include the snippets, the comments from the open-ended questions right inside the KPI report. So get that report outside of your own digital group. And frankly, numbers are interesting to some people, but real comments, lists of just putting down verbatim the comments people have written about your website in the open-ended question is a great way to create and drive empathy across your organization for your website users. And from what we've seen, building empathy and building an understanding is key to making that positive change, which of course has a positive impact not only on your users, but on your bottom line as well.
Best practice number 4, again, acting on the feedback. You've asked for the data, your users have submitted the data, make a point to analyze it, derive conclusions, and then act on it. You will want to target higher priority solvable issues, which means elevate issues that are on high traffic pages, because those are the ones that are causing the most trouble. But also note that you can elevate issues that are more easily resolved, and they may be on pages that are not necessarily the most highly trafficked. But nonetheless, by making improvements and making them promptly in response to feedback that you've received, you will be boosting goodwill. Another example of acting on feedback is that voice of the customer feedback can help you in deciding what to do in terms of your improvement process. And there's an example in the literature about Salesforce.com where their digital development team knew that they had a particular form, a landing page, that wasn't converting at the rate that they expected. They were driving a fair amount of traffic to this form, but they just weren't getting the conversions. People weren't filling out that form. The internal staff had a number of different competing theories on why that might be, but no one was really certain for the reason or what the reason was. Well, they solved this problem by simply putting up a site-wide survey. In this case, it was 4C, and they targeted that survey to pop for people who went to the form in question and then chose to navigate away from it. They asked those people, why is it that you navigated it away from it? What were the primary reasons why you didn't want to convert on this? And as a result, voice of the customer feedback was helpful in those people making the changes, or Salesforce in this case, making the changes in improving that form. Another way that voice of the customer feedback can assist in the actual process of improvement is when it comes to session reviews. Now, those of you who are familiar with TLeaf or other session recording tools, you'll know that you can record every user's experience on a particular website. Expedia was using TLeaf and had been for some time. Expedia, being a rather large site, had a great number of user sessions recorded. And the question was, we've got limited resources, we've got a limited number of analysts. What are the user sessions that we look at? The way they solve that question is by relying on their voice of the customer feedback. Where are the pages that are problematic? Those are the user sessions that we need to go to. So if a user session involves pages that are always getting high rankings, we don't need to look at those. Let's focus first on those that are getting low rankings. And number 5, repeat the process. And what we mean here is to establish a periodic cycle of pulling in data, identifying problem areas, developing conclusions, and then acting on that feedback. This is another way of saying this is how you develop a culture of data-driven improvements. And this is a phrase that gets tossed around a lot, but in the case of voice of the feedback, or voice of the customer, you really see why it matters. You want your improvement process to be driven by input that you're getting from people that you're trying to appeal to, your customers, your visitors. Those folks really should be guiding how it is that you improve your particular digital asset.
Yeah, and in fact, the old world we lived in was the idea of where, as you brought up, Brian, focus groups, interviews. There's a lot of great in-depth information that comes from those conversations, but they suffer from a few problems. They're expensive. You can probably only do them a few times a year periodically, and it's very easy for one voice to really speak louder than any of the others, or kind of one person to either sway an entire group, or for one person to for their opinion to be taken maybe higher than it should be. And so with this way of surveying and listening to your customers, you have a continuous cycle of listening and reacting. And I think as long as you're committed to reviewing and then acting and improving on it, you're going to see the trends where people are frustrated, and you'll also reduce the opportunity for any one person who has a big opinion to dramatically sway your website experience, possibly in a way that isn't correct for the mass.
So we thought we'd share with you too a few pearls of wisdom based on our experience. One of which would be the voice of the customer or customer experience management tools have been growing in complexity in recent years, and we see no reason why that trend will not continue. People's lives are increasingly being lived online. There is more opportunity for exchanges online. Analyzing those exchanges, analyzing those experiences, and then finding ways to optimize those experiences. That area of practice, that area of work is simply going to grow as time wears on. So if you don't have a voice of the customer program yet, you really should start today, in fact, because there's, as we said before, there's not a strong barrier to getting into this particular area. And the benefits that are remarkable, because you will be able to derive meaningful information that can be acted upon. And finally,
you'll be able. Don't be afraid of that negative feedback. Really, it's hard to hear that your website is difficult to use or it's confusing. It's hard to hear that someone who clicked on your PPC ad came and then they didn't know what you wanted them to do. But you know what? If you don't hear it, you can never improve. You've got to view those things as opportunities. And every time somebody's frustrated and they let you into their brain and they risk it to tell you what they're feeling and what's frustrating them, you owe it to them to listen, and you owe it to them to act. And so it's great to hear that things are working well. That's a great validation. But I think especially as you start a program like this, really being open to the negative feedback, even when it contradicts what your vice president says, what your president, what your sales team says, this information right from the customer, it trumps everybody inside your organization.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I think in general, once you open up the floodgates, once you start inviting people to give you feedback, most of it probably will be negative. People are more apt to share negative experiences because they're frustrated versus positive experiences because they want to move on and go outside and go for a walk or something of that nature. So more often than not, you're going to get negative feedback, but that negative feedback is an opportunity for improvement. Right. And speaking of feedback, we're nearing the end of our presentation here, and we would encourage you to give us your feedback. Here's the email addresses for both Marcus and myself. You can give us a phone call at Creo if you've got thoughts on the presentation or thoughts on voice of the customer generally. We're always happy to hear from folks. And in fact, there may be some questions that we may want to address at this point now that we're at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, Brian, we do have one actually. Somebody has asked, there's a sizable gap between the higher end tools you review and the lower end tools. Why should I spend $60,000 a year when I can get it for free or get it for $3,000 to $5,000 a year?
Right. Yeah, it's a fair question, and I would, I guess, ask and answer in a somewhat flip manner is that you do get what you pay for. Um, the lower end tools are more limited in a number of ways. They don't necessarily provide all the targeting capability. Some of their survey options are less robust. They may not integrate that well with your analytics program. They may not provide the industry benchmarking that I mentioned earlier, which I personally find particularly interesting. And they also won't provide the support that you would get should you use the higher end tools. I mean, that said, I think Marcus raised earlier, if you're uncomfortable, if your organization's uncomfortable from a budgetary standpoint in spending the amount of money that you would need to spend for a 4C or opinion lab, use one of the cheaper tools because it's a great entry point, and you can simply grow into the tool that fits you best.
Great. Brian, we've got another question here. Someone has asked my favorite question, my favorite topic at least. Can we discuss in more detail segmentation of feedback?
Well, that's. I think you should take that because that's exactly up your alley.
I do love that topic. You know, when most of these tools will allow segmenting of information within the questions you asked, and that's part of the power. So if we go back to 4Q and we look at that, they're going to say, rank us 1 to 10. How was your experience? Also tell us why you were here, and tell us, were you able to complete that? You could imagine then that along those 3 data points, you could do a lot of segmentation. You would want to, in fact, and I believe the 4Q report by default segments things like what was the site score given 1 to 10 broken down by the purpose of visit, or broken down by people who were able or unable to actually complete their purpose of visit, as well as looking at things like, and I believe it's the task completion question, when you came here today to do something, were you able to do it? And then segment that out and look at those by not just broadly, 48% said no and everyone else said yes, but of people who came looking for a job, what % of them were able to do it? Of people today coming to browse products, what % of them were able to do it? And then of those that were not able to do it, what was their specific feedback, or what was their specific site score? So that's segmenting the information within the data tool that's given. We also have this idea of combining data with our clickstream analytics, like Google Analytics. And so being able to say, boy, if people who came from social, what was their overall site score? What was their percentage of people that could actually complete the task they came to do? What was their reason for visit? Looking at that should give you some reflection as to back to your social media efforts. So if you're using Twitter or Facebook and you're doing a lot of promotions of a certain thing, hopefully people who come to your site and take a survey there, you'll see that those people are coming with a purpose of visit to do the thing you're wanting them to do. They may not be landing in the right place. They may not get it, but that's really where the power of segmentation comes in, is stop looking at things in aggregate. Avinash is, of course, this is the drum that he beats in almost every single Occam's Razor blog, it's about segmentation equals love. There is no such thing as the average person. So start to find, especially places where there's low-hanging fruit around poor scores or people unable to complete their task that they came to for your website today.
Thanks. Here's one more question that I just came across. Here's a listener who said that she likes the idea of doing online interviews with users or customers using a screen sharing tool, but wanted to know what are the considerations to take into account when trying to get a representative sample of my audience?
I think I believe it was VMware's example where they, on their survey, asked you your name and your address, your email address, and would you like to be contacted. We think about those things in terms of customer support activity, but these are the perfect people to ask to reach out to and say, can I talk to you for 15 minutes about your website experience? If you're not comfortable collecting that kind of information on your survey form, just go to your customer service department. go to the people who are in touch with your customers, maybe your sales department, maybe your distributors, and ask them for referrals to people who would be willing to talk about their website experience. Customer service usually has a long list of, they have to keep records about who they've spoken with, and dealers typically are more than willing to tell you their opinion about just about anything. So use those outlets that you already have where you're gathering people's information, and then simply send them an email or reach out and call them and be willing to listen to everything they have to say.
All right, good response. So good questions. Thanks for sending them in. We're at the top of the hour right now, so I think we will draw this presentation to a close. Before we leave, however, just a reminder that we will be doing another Data into Dollars webinar in March. And in February, on February 20th, we will be talking about the 7 deadly sins of mobile MVPs. So Marcus, what exactly does that mean?
Well, you'll have to tune in, but the short version is we see a lot of people looking to launch a mobile strategy or build their first mobile app for their business, and they come to us with the idea of a minimum viable product, which is the MVP idea, very popular term these days, and yet it's very hard to do. So we have seen a pattern of mistakes people have made which cost them dollars, which cost them mind share, which cost adoption, and actually can be a detriment to their brand. I don't want to give any more away, but we're going to help people not make those mistakes.
All right. Well, registration information for both of these upcoming events will be sent out via email, and we'll also post it on the Creo website. We want to thank you all for attending today, and wish you well.
Thank you very much. Again, we do love feedback, so please feel free to tell us what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and any ideas you have for topics of upcoming content, webinars, white papers that you'd be interested in. We love to hear you, and we want to make sure that we're creating ideas and content that is interesting to you, our audience.
Thanks again, everyone.